As we all know, there are many issues and problems that plague our society and the world. As I read the paper this morning, reading about, I don't know what we would call it, some kind of potential civil war in Russia. At first, you're like, wow, this is good. Wait a second, this could be really bad. And so many of us are involved with ways to make the world a little bit better, whether it's through our work with racial justice, whether it's our work to make our community and the world more inclusive during this Pride Month, whether it's our work to try to improve the situation with the climate, whether it's so many different issues. And one of them that has been a particular passion of mine and others in the community, and seemingly incredibly challenging in this country, is one that we could prevent. Right now, more young people die in gun violence than any other thing. You look back 50 years ago, we were able to do something in car accidents by requiring everyone to wear seatbelts and making cars safer. We have the ability to make a change here. And so every year we pause to both remember the victims of gun violence, to make ourselves more aware, and hopefully to empower ourselves so that we can do something. It's great to have Ruth Zakarin here. She is the executive director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, which is an incredible organization that does so much through its helping to build awareness, building coalitions and advocacy and community organizing. She's a trained community organizer for over 25 years, working with youth and adults impacted by domestic and sexual violence. She's particularly interested in creating models of trauma-informed advocacy and policy making. My pleasure to welcome Ruth. Go with two. Let's double. Everything's double.
Now can you? Oh. We live in an age of technical difficulties, and yes, you are on mute, but apparently I am no longer on mute. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Again, my name is Ruth Zakarin. I'm always very honored to be able to say that I am the executive director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And I'm also a member of the Jewish community. So it's moments like this that are particularly meaningful for me to be able to talk about my work, this work, our work in my Jewish community. And I thank you all for giving me the opportunity to do this. I also love seeing all of the orange in front of me. We've been a little busy at the coalition. It occurred to me I should wear a coalition t-shirt, but they're all in the wash after what this week has been. But it's lovely to see the orange in front of me, and it's lovely to see all of you here this Shabbat to engage in this conversation. And as I was reflecting on what I wanted to talk about, and first of all, I also just want to reflect on something that Rabbi Kling Perkins said earlier today, or how every life is holy and every person is holy. And I want to come back to that. But as I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, I was remembering being here with you in this spot 3.5 years ago. I had the opportunity to speak with you. It was Shabbat. I think it was MLK Shabbat, and it was right before the pandemic started. And so 3.5 years ago, I was here with you, and it occurs to me that today I'd love to reflect a bit on not just our work at the coalition, but how things have evolved for the coalition since I last stood with you, as well as where we're at 3.5 years later when it comes to addressing gun violence in this country. So just a bit about me. As Rabbi Lerner mentioned, I've been with the coalition a little over 4 years. But prior to coming to this work, I spent my entire adult life doing trauma response with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And it is really that work that brought me to be thinking about the issue of guns and gun violence, working with survivors who were threatened or harmed by abusers who had access to guns. And for the 11 years that I worked in Brockton, we were the place that took care of children in the aftermath of a domestic violence homicide, which is most often, not always, but most often perpetrated with a gun. And it was sitting in close proximity to that trauma that made me want to not just do trauma response, but trauma prevention, and think about what we could do to change policies and change systems to prevent the trauma from happening at all. So that's the journey that led me to be working with the coalition. And I thank you for being here today and being with me on that journey. So first, a note around what do we mean when we talk about the issue of gun violence, which is an incredibly complex issue. As Rabbi Lerner mentioned, gun violence is now the leading cause of death for our children here in this country. And deaths from gun violence continue to rise each year. And those are deaths from homicides, from firearm suicides, domestic violence homicides, unintentional shootings, police shootings. It's so incredibly complex. And so because the issue is so complex, it also requires a complex and nuanced approach to addressing it. Is the microphone going in and out a bit? How's that? Is that a little bit better? The P's and P's. Hopefully this sound is working okay for everyone. Okay, perfect. The other thing that I always am careful to mention when we talk about the issue of gun violence is, of course, it is about the deaths. It's about the incredible loss. But the trauma of gun violence is much bigger than that. It's the trauma of the families who have an empty seat at their dinner table. It's the trauma of being injured in a shooting and surviving, but surviving with a lifelong impact of that shooting. It is the trauma of witnessing gun violence. It is the trauma of living in a community where shootings happen far too often. And it is also the trauma of living in a country where we know that this is a part of the fabric of our existence. This is a part of the American narrative. I've been talking a lot also with, let me actually back up for a second. And I want to talk about the trauma that has also been happening right here in Massachusetts because of what we know about school shootings and the swattings that have been happening in communities around the Commonwealth. If you're not familiar with that term, a swatting incident refers to someone who calls in saying that they are going to commit a shooting at a school, and it is most often not a real threat, but it obviously puts that school into a state of absolute panic. And we've had incidents like that, including in my kids' high school just this year. And that is another aspect of the trauma of gun violence. So when we think about the issue of gun violence, I think we need to really hold all of that trauma as well. And that's something that we try to do at the coalition. We approach the issue of gun violence as a public health crisis that is driven by racial and economic disparity, that is causing multiple layers of trauma, that looks very different in different communities, and really requires a very holistic response. And we know that if we engage in that holistic response, that includes strengthening our laws and policy change, sustained investment in community-based solutions, and lifting up research and data and listening to what the data has to tell us, that we will make change on this issue. We know that we will. So our work at the coalition is to engage in all aspects of that work. And we do that in a number of ways. Rabbi Lerner referred to them, but I just want to spend a little bit of time telling you more about the ways that we approach the prevention of gun violence in the Commonwealth. And I should note that our work is really focused on Massachusetts. What we do here in states matters greatly, especially in absence of being able to make meaningful change on the federal level. And I'll touch on that a bit more later. But our work is really to focus on where we're at here in Massachusetts and what we can do to keep our communities safer. And we do that in a number of ways. One is advocacy. I think folks most well know us for showing up at the State House and calling for action on bills and budget line items that address the issue of gun violence, both in terms of the proliferation of guns in our communities, as well as root causes of gun violence. We're doing a great deal of work right now at the State House with the high optimism that we will have a comprehensive gun safety law this session. But we also do a lot of work around bills that address root causes of gun violence with a focus on how we care for our young people. We believe that caring for young people, particularly system-involved young people, is foundational to violence prevention. And to that end, we have partnered with an organization called Citizens for Juvenile Justice to champion policies such as juvenile diversion, raise the age, and expungement that will care for young people who are involved with the criminal legal system and make sure that they get the services and supports that they need. We also have a bill that would provide universal basic income for youth aging out of foster care, because we know that those are kids who struggle in the world, who need more supports in order to be safe and well. In addition to our legislative advocacy work, and I'm going to come back and talk about the omnibus bill in a minute, but in addition to that work, we also do a great deal of work to ensure that we are funding community-based solutions as robustly as possible. And 2 years ago, when President Biden talked about the American Rescue Plan being eligible to be used for violence prevention, we jumped on that opportunity and convened large coalition with national partners and local organizations to agitate for the state of Massachusetts to do just that. And I'm very proud to say that we were successful at getting an allocation of $50 million for gun violence prevention, youth jobs, and reentry services, with an additional $13 million for gun violence prevention in the economic bill that was several months later. And we see that as being an essential part of our work, is to make sure that we are funding those community-based solutions that we know are working. In addition to our advocacy work, we do a great deal of public education and awareness, lots of individual conversations, lots of group workshops. We've also been partnering with Create a Buzz documentary films to hold screenings and panel discussions centered around their documentary, This Ain't Normal, which is about youth violence in Boston and the street outreach workers that show up for our young people every day. And the idea of that work is to bring people in conversation about root causes of youth violence and what solutions look like. We are also a coalition. We have grown tremendously in the 10 years of our existence. We now have 126 member organizations from across the Commonwealth, as well as some of our national partners. And our aim is to speak in one unified voice and build power to make change around gun violence, to show up for our member organizations. We're doing some more work to support our member organizations in their policy priorities so that they can move forward with the policies and the budget line items that they know will help their work. And we also have many of our member organizations reflected on our leadership team so that we are speaking and working in true coalition. And the last part of our work is community organizing, which is something near and dear to my heart. In addition to being a trauma response clinician, as Rabbi Lerner mentioned, I'm a trained community organizer. And that is truly a way to build power when you bring folks in community together to speak in one voice and call for change. And our organizing director, who's a total rock star, has been focusing on communities most impacted by gun violence with a real focus on youth. She's doing a great deal of work with young people to not just give them skills around what advocacy looks like so that they feel empowered to show up at the State House or show up with their municipal leaders and say what they want to see happen, but to also hold us accountable to their wisdom. They know what they need to make their community safer, and we adults need to show up for them and with them in the work that they identify is going to not just prevent violence, but also promote peace. So that's what our work focuses on. We've had quite the journey in the 3.5 years since I was last with you in terms of having more member organizations. We've been able to increase our staff. So we're about to hire our 4th full-time staff member, which is super exciting, and to really have more impact and increased reach across the Commonwealth. And it has been truly an honor to be a part of the growth of the coalition and to see the way this work has blossomed, and to also see how important it is that we really continue to agitate for change here in the Commonwealth. Speaking of change, there has been much change when it comes to the issue of gun violence in the past 3.5 years since I last stood with you. We have seen an ever increasing number of shootings across the country. And I'm sure you are all very aware of the fact that in 2023, we have had more mass shootings than days of the year. That is incredibly alarming and uniquely American. There is no other country where we're seeing this happen in this way. There is no other country where there are more guns in circulation than people. And during the pandemic, we saw rates of gun sales go way up, way up. And it is now estimated that we have over 400 million guns in civilian circulation. And that is a very sobering statistic. But at the same time, gun violence is preventable. There are things that we can do to make this different. There are ways that has been really challenging. We have just marked the 1-year anniversary of the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court, which made a lot of things more challenging. But there are ways that we can continue to keep our laws strong here in Massachusetts. We know what those ways are. We have been in conversation with our state leaders to make sure that happens. And I say all that because while it has been really disturbing to see what's happening across the country, states that have been enacting permitless carry, so you don't need to do anything in order to get a gun, which we know increases rates of gun violence, that's not how we're going to operate here in Massachusetts. So in spite of the challenges, in spite of the Supreme Court decision that made it more difficult for states to be able to regulate access to guns, we are going to push back on all of that. And I feel very optimistic about that. And the work here in Massachusetts is so important because we need to continue to protect the residents of our state from gun violence. And I want to pause on that for a second, because I think it's really important for us to sit with the fact that while our rates of gun violence are lower here in Massachusetts than most other states in the country, because our laws are stronger, because we invest in community-based solutions, we still have gun violence here in the Commonwealth. On Thursday, I stood in front of the State House with many of my colleagues to hold an event to call for action on gun violence. And when I prepared my remarks for that event, I went through the statistics to see all the communities around the Commonwealth that had experienced a fatal shooting, and there were a lot of them. Gun violence is still happening in the Commonwealth throughout our state, but gunshots are far too common in particular neighborhoods and particular communities that have experienced chronic disinvestment, that have been impacted by racist policymaking, that has created the conditions in which violence thrive. And we need to have a real lens on ensuring that our work focuses on those communities and changes those policies, invests in community-based solutions, as well as those communities themselves, to change the narrative of constant gunfire that happens far too often. Our work here in the Commonwealth is also really important because we can be an example to the rest of the country. We can be an example to other states, and we can be an example to the federal government on what works. Because we know what works. We are seeing it here in the Commonwealth. We have more work to do, but we know that we have a strong basis of laws that will help us prevent the trauma of gun violence. So in the past 3.5 years since I last stood with you, the news has been quite alarming. And I think all of us are feeling a bit flooded with reports of mass shootings and gun violence across the country. It's a lot to sit with. But we also know that there is more that we can do. And I trust that here in the Commonwealth, we are going to do that hard work of making that happen. I mentioned before the omnibus gun bill. It is something that we have been working on very intently, along with our national partners, to tell our state leaders what we want to see included in this comprehensive bill. Things like better regulation of ghost guns. If you're not familiar with that term, it refers to many things, including when people buy a kit online of up to 80% of the parts of a gun, they assemble it in their home. It does not have a serial number, is untraceable, and is therefore a ghost gun. We can do more to regulate that and prevent that from happening. We also want to see better collection of data recovered from guns in the aftermath of a crime or traumatic event, to understand more about where those guns are coming from and to use that data to make better policy. We want to see industry accountability so that people who have been impacted by gun violence have more of a mechanism to hold particularly the bad actors in the gun industry accountable. And we want to see more investment in community-based solutions. And I trust that we're going to get this done this legislative session, particularly when everyone in the community joins us in demanding from our state leaders that we make this happen. I'm going to enlist your help in this. Stay tuned for that. So while the past 3.5 years have been difficult, we as a coalition have grown. We have built relationships. We have found ways to strengthen our policies. And we also have allies in our state leadership who are committed to making this happen. And we bring all those voices together along with all of you. I trust that we will be successful in making change and preventing gun violence in all of our communities in every zip code. And to conclude, I just want to go back to what Rabbi Kling-Perkins was talking about before in terms of the holiness of every life, because that is a true core value that I think we can all subscribe to. What we talk about at the coalition is those core values, is really drilling down, why are we here in this work? And I would say that no matter how you feel about the Second Amendment, about what our laws need to be, wherever you fall on that spectrum, I think we can all agree and come together around some core values, that every child deserves to be safe. Every child deserves to be safe at school, walking home from school, and playing in their neighborhoods after school. I think we can all agree on that as a core value. And when we can come together around that, I do believe that we can make change. So I thank all of you for joining me today and having this conversation. I would encourage all of you, if you're interested in learning more about the omnibus gun bill or other legislative priorities or getting involved, come and see me during Kiddush, because we would love to enlist everyone's help in calling on our state leaders to make this comprehensive bill a reality so that we can know that Massachusetts will continue to lead. That in spite of the Supreme Court's Bruin decision, in spite of what we're seeing in other states weakening their gun laws, in spite of what we're seeing with the ever increasing number of shootings across the country, we in Massachusetts are going to do this differently. We will continue to strengthen our policies. We will continue to invest in community-based solutions. We will continue to invest in the communities most impacted by gun violence. And we will work together to make sure that every child gets to be safe wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.